What happens when one man tries to watch all of the sci-fi films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Welcome back to the Sci-Fi Project, and if you're just joining us, we don't just cover sci-fi films here. This is sort of where I do all of the rest of the genre films. So you're going to see sci-fi here, but you're also going to see fantasy, you're going to see kaiju flicks, you're going to see superhero stuff, all of the things that don't fit under horror, which I cover over on the regular 80s Project. And yeah, we're going into 1984, which has quite a few really top-notch projects. So let's just jump right in and see what this year has to bring. The Sci-Fi of 84 begins in Italy, and we start on January 28th with a little ditty called Warriors of the Year 2072. We start off in the future in a very Blade Runner-y looking city, and it's 2072 of course, and we see a televised gladiator show called Kill Bike that runs in the US. Meanwhile, in Rome, the head of a rival network called WBS is angry about the competitor show's popularity and their big champion, a guy named Drake. WBS's top show is something called The Danger Game, in which a person is strapped into a machine and put through death scenarios in their head, and if they can keep their cool, they win. Meanwhile, Drake gets married to an American TV star, and WBS head Cortez gets the order to put together their own gladiator game TV show within 40 days. He's given a roster of death row inmates from around the world to pick from, and one of them turns out to be Drake himself after he kills a couple of guys who have broken into his house and murdered his wife, whistling while they do it. They're all brought in and have these bracelets burned into their wrists to track them, and he meets his fellow contestants. One is Monk with a scarred face, and there's also good old Al Cliver, and Fred Williamson, and Hal Yamanuchi, the three fellows who knew their way around an Italian ripoff flick. After a good chunk of training, escape attempts, and punishment, Drake is helped out by one of the execs that discovers that there's a little more to his crime than was previously thought. Finally though, the contest begins with the crew geared up and on tricked out motorcycles, beginning the first of a number of battles to the death. And I know that we've been talking about a lot of Mad Max ripoffs and Escape from New York ripoffs in the previous years, and this is definitely one of them, but it's also doing its own thing. None other than the horror master Lucio Fulci was brought in to direct, but he ended up clashing with the producers non-stop about the vision for the film. Their disputes got to the point that they ended up taking him to court, and he had been set to make another film with them called Blast Fighter. After the suit, they ended up still making the film without Fulci, but due to the case, had to change the script, and the only thing that remained was the title, as it was originally going to be a post-apocalyptic film, and instead was released as a straightforward action flick. This one would end up getting released under a handful of different titles, including Rome 2072 AD, The New Gladiators, Fighting Centurions, Rome 2033, The Fighter Centurions, and also just The New Gladiators. It wouldn't make as big of a splash as the director's horror work, but still did pretty well and had some decent reviews, but was mostly negative. And I'm a sucker for some Fulci, so this gets a 3.5. I think it's pretty fun, even if the middle portion is a bit of a drag. I just wish that there was some more time given to the games and such, but I like what it's doing, and there's like a low-rent charm to those city models. The sci-fi cultural significance is a 2, since it's not all that well known, but it's got some known faces in there, and gets an extra push just from being from Fulci, even if it's not one of his bigger projects. Should you watch it? Yeah, I mean, it's Lucio.
3, 2, 1, 0, they're up!
This next one is another international entry since we're headed over to France on February 8th, although it's a very American-infused production, even if it didn't arrive here until 1985, and it's Gwendoline, or, I suppose, The Perils of Gwendoline in the Land of the Yik Yak. It begins in a Chinese port as a trio of thieves open a container and find a human woman inside and kidnap her. They sell her off to a local gangster, but luckily she's rescued by dashing rogue Willard. Oh, and meanwhile, the woman is Gwendoline, but you're more used to seeing her dancing around the hood of a car in the still of the night. After she's rescued,
You big blue eyes, long white hands.
I have never really heard anyone compliment someone's hands on their whiteness or longness. Is having long hands a desirable trait or something? It seems that Gwendoline is looking for her father and a rare butterfly that he was searching for, and her maid have traveled across the world. They convince Willard to assist them, and they find a man that says that it can be found in the land of the Yik Yak, a sort of lost area. They head out by boat, running into marauders along the way, and it's clearly rocking that Indiana Jones vibe for this portion and is mostly just an action film. But don't worry, the sci-fi and fantasy stuff is on its way. After some flirtation and casual nudity, Willard and Gwendoline have some sparks fly with, straw? But then things take a drastic turn when they finally track down that elusive flutterby and end up in some sort of underground city with female soldiers in what looks like Dune garb and big machines. They then need to rescue Beth and find their quarry, all while wearing, well, thongs. So this one was a French film and directed by a guy named, and I'm not making this up, Just Jackin. He was known for doing softcore films that were adaptations of famous stories like the original Emmanuel, The Story of O, and Lady Chatterley's Lover. You know, just Jackin did those. This one was also a version of a printed tale based on a series of bondage-themed comics of a character called Sweet Gwendoline. This was a very early point in Katayan's career as well, and would be her first film role, with her only previous gigs being TV shows. This version of the film, the French version, was simply called Gwendoline, but was retitled to The Perils of Gwendoline in the Land of the Yik Yak for American release in January of '85 and had close to 20 minutes chopped out. It skipped the theater here, going straight to video and cable, but formed a cult following pretty damn quick, as soon as Tawny's star started to rise, and this film featured several scenes of her in the nude. And this isn't great, but it is pretty damn fun, so I'll give it a 3. It's goofy and campy, and it feels like you're watching several movies at once, but at least they're never dull. The SFCS is a 2 though, since it's not much reputed, but did have some known faces and did get that cult success for a while. Should you watch it? I'd say yes, it's certainly not that perilous.
Hey, you guys okay? You're not dead or anything?
Let's stay over in Europe and pop over to West Germany now for a film that's debuted there on February 19th and get weird with Decoder. It begins with a man in a government facility that seems to be monitoring people, and everything is told in a very odd, fractured way, with mostly just music, like a distorted music video, and some occasional shocking imagery on the screen. There's also this little burger joint where the local teens hang out, and this strip club that the agent frequents, and the two intersect when one of the dancers there is involved with a guy who calls himself a noise enthusiast. She tells a story about a wasteland, and there's an old man there, walking with a cane, with a very distinct voice.
Fading into the cold spring air, posed a colorless question.
At one point, FM overhears the burger shop manager tell an employee not to play a particular tape and sees how the music playing affects the diners. And I guess I should point out that FM is played by FM Einheit, a former member of the classic industrial noise group Einstürzende Neubauten. His journey leads him to an underground church where the preacher is Genesis P. Orridge from Psychic TV and discovers that a certain tape playing a certain noise will trigger people's instincts to riot and begin a revolution. So, this one is weird, really weird. It's by a man named Musha, and this was his second and final feature film, both of which were avant-garde music-based works. It was based on the works of writer William S. Burroughs, and he's featured in the film as that old man in the visions. It's not adapting a specific Burroughs work as much as it is trying to capture the vibes of his writings. This was a time of a lot of unrest in Germany, and most of the footage of the riots happening in the film is actual news footage from the time. It was made for a rather low budget, although no numbers are listed, and it never really made it past the art film world in terms of popularity, and became a sort of a lost film for a few decades. There were copies of it out there, but no one really talked about it or remembered it existed until recently, when it was given a new transfer and release. And maybe I'm partial to Burroughs stuff, or maybe it's my love of 80s industrial music, but this is a 3.5. Like, sure, it's what some would call pretentious, and I'm sure it'll be called boring, but I dig it and the mood that it's putting down. The SFCS is just a 1 though, since it's really obscure at this point, and one that no one talks about and didn't impact the scene at all. Like maybe the music scene a bit, but certainly not the film one. Should you watch it? If what I described sounds cool, then yes. If it sounds artsy fartsy, well, it is. The next one is one of those entries that doesn't have a confirmed release date, and all that's known is that it was released in Italy sometime in '84, and it's A Man Called Rage. If it's in this time frame and it's from Italy, chances are that it's in a post-apocalyptic world, and we see mushroom clouds in the beginning, so yep. There's a small group of soldiers skulking about, slowly being taken out by unseen forces, but there's also mutants about. They appear to be after this man in a black t-shirt, and they finally manage to capture him, making sure to take him alive. Along the way, their truck is ambushed by guys, and including this one that looks like he stole Gilligan's wardrobe, but they're able to defeat them by teaming up. Eventually, they get him back to some sort of research facility, where we find out that his name is Captain Strike, but his nickname is apparently Rage. He's met by deep discount Sean Connery and recruited to find some sort of lost base, and Rage says that he was the lone survivor of his unit, and some disease ravaged his friends, and is quite mad that they didn't let him into their little secret city. They want him to find it and a stash of uranium that they plan to use to save mankind, and he reluctantly agrees, and they head out into the Forbidden Lands, and they enlist the help of a man named Slash, named for a large scar on his face, and they go out in search, facing down marauders that attack them while the most inappropriate music possible plays. But it turns out that Slash betrays them, and then it's a race against time for these two groups to find that uranium. And like a bunch of other films from this early 80s era, this is a ripoff of several different things. It's a pinch of Escape from New York, a bit of Mad Max, and it was directed by Tonino Ricci. We've already encountered him here on the Sci-Fi Project with 1983's Thor the Conqueror, and also on the Horror Project with 1982's Bacterion. And he also did an action flick in '83 called Rush that did have some sci-fi elements that I likely should have included on the Sci-Fi Project, but it also featured Bruno Minetti as the main character. So some countries released this as Rush 2, even though they're not connected, and Bruno does indeed play a different character. And this is okay, it's a 2. It's stuff that we've all seen before, but it's done well enough, although it has one of the most eye-rolling endings I've seen in a while when it's discovered what they're really after. The significance is a 1 since it's really obscure and doesn't break any new ground, but it's just doing that whole Mad Max thing again. Should you watch it? Probably not. You've seen this all before, although it's not a terrible watch by any means.
Cryonic cell?
Yeah.
Radioactivity?
0 level, apparently.
It looks like we're going back to West Germany because 3 days later, on February 22nd, another sci-fi oriented flick arrived with the Noah's Ark principle. It starts in 1997, the far, far future, in Pennsylvania, and we have an astronaut named Billy returning from a stint on a space station, but it seems like something happened up there, and he's being blamed for it. We then flash back to the Florida Arc Lab, an experimental station that was being used to control the weather and was a joint project between the US and Europe. Billy's up there and mentions his friend Max, and they bond over raising frogs and having them jump on their faces, which is a unique bond. Max has a wife down on Earth named Eva, but he hasn't seen her in a while, and it seems like this is an alternate Earth, and the world here is mostly at peace and has given up weapons of mass destruction. However, tensions between the US and Russia are starting to rise, and they're suddenly given a message to irradiate an area of Earth. But whoops, it seems like they don't really know who gave that order, and it appears as if the burst of radiation has increased the Cold War going on below. There's then a bunch of problems with Max's love life and whether or not he's a spy, and damage to their own ship that needs repaired. And more complications arrive when Eva herself shows up at the space station with another agent. But who's working for who here? And yep, this one is German, West German to be specific, because this is pre-wall coming down, and the story here is pretty wild. This is a student film. Yes, you heard that right, but not just any student. This is the debut feature film for Roland Emmerich, future director of Universal Soldier, Stargate, Independence Day, and Fozilla. He made this movie after attending film school in Germany as his thesis project. It said that the standard budget for the project at the school at this time was around 20,000 Deutschmark, but Emmerich wanted to go bigger. Star Wars' success had convinced him that sci-fi was the way to go and that people were interested in space films, and was able to raise over 1 million Deutschmark from various investors, making it Germany's most expensive student project of all time. The entire thing was filmed in an abandoned washing machine factory with parts of sets built to look like their ship, but the close quarters is likely why most of the film is shot in close-ups. There's not much information about the release and how well it did, but it did get some critical acclaim and helped get Emmerich noted by American studios. And it's alright, I'm going for a 2.5. I want to give it higher for the sheer ambition of this being a student project and being this big, but it's so damn dry and lacks drama and character. The SFCS is a 1.5 since it's not well known at all in the US, but I'll give it a slight boost for kicking off Emmerich's career, and he'd go on to be a major player. Should you watch it? From a curiosity standpoint, maybe, but there's not a whole lot to the story.
Durchschmelzen des Reaktors. Achtung, noch etwa 3 Minuten.
We're going back into the land of the unconfirmed dates and headed over to Australia for this next one that came out just sometime in '84, and it's weird, and it's future Schlock. We're set in some far future where at some point there were class wars and individualism has been wiped out and everyone looks and acts the same and has the same life goals. They all strive to own a Betamax, so this is clearly the better future, and they long to go to shopping malls. But then there's the lower classes, who they've shoved into ghettos and fenced in, and they call the middle class the subbies, suburbanites. But there's two guys, the Cisco Kid and Poncho, and they run loose and cause trouble with the cops. There's a bartender narrating it all, and he runs a bar where Sarah and Bear perform while wearing Mad Max-inspired makeup, and it turns out that they're also Cisco and Poncho. They spend their time dressing up like subbies and heading out into the world to cause chaos, like telling them that they have to move if they live in a house with fake brick, and getting police to randomly start beating people, and come on, do they really need convincing? It's then just a random assortment of adventures as Sarah and the Bear stir things up and make a new girlfriend, while the authorities hone in on their alter egos. So, this is by a duo that both wrote and directed, and they're Chris Keeley and Barry Peake, and together they made 4 films, and 2 of them were sci-fi oriented. They were both in charge of a famous art house theatre in Melbourne called the Valhalla Cinema, and it became known as the coolest place in Australia to show cult films. This movie was designed to play exclusively in their theaters, as they had several throughout the continent. The budget was pretty low at around $80,000, but ended up being a flop, and only earned back half of that. In order to save some money on storage costs, the team ended up destroying the original negatives, which meant that the only versions that still exist are rips from VHS from the 80s, so the quality is not that great. And I'm just going with a 2 on this one. Honestly, I thought it would be right up my alley, but I found it grating, and the comedy doesn't work, and the satire elements are really poorly developed. The SFCS is just a 1 since it's unknown in the States and was even a flop in its own country with no recognizable faces. Should you watch it? Probably not. I imagine this will appeal to some, but I was not one of those people.
So you're a grubby one? Then your body falls off.
Our first block of the year ends in a pretty spectacular way as we go back to the US for a film that debuted on March 2nd, even though it did play at a film festival in Berlin in February, but it's Repo Man. This starts with a cop pulling over a man and looks in his trunk, only to then be blasted by a beam of light and disintegrated. We're then in a supermarket, and a high school wrestler is here and gets fired from his job, and he's a punk. He gets cheated on, and the next day is approached by a space trucker and convinced to move a car, which just so happens to belong to someone else. And hey, Bud is a Repo Man, and they offer him a job. At first he says no, but after eating generic food, because everything in this film is generic brand, he changes his mind. Meanwhile, that car from the intro comes rolling into the city, and Otto meets a young woman named Layla who says that she has proof aliens exist and people are after her. He encounters the other Repo Men, including Bob the Goon, who's convinced that there's flying saucers out there that are actually time machines. There's a 20 grand marker on that Malibu from the beginning, so the various squads of Repo Men are all after it, but so are some government agents, and eventually our stories start to converge. And this one is a classic, and it's both written and directed by Alex Cox. It was his first feature film, although he'd go on to do a lot more, including Sid and Nancy, and a whole lot of cool music videos. Here, he was fresh out of film school at UCLA, and he teamed up with a couple of his fellow classmates to get this off of the ground. It seems that in order to get himself through college, Cox worked as an actual Repo Man, and some of the experiences in the film were based on things that had actually happened to him. They were able to get Mike Nesmith from the Monkees to sign on as an executive producer, which got them a distribution deal through Universal. The budget was only $1.5 million, and they changed the concept of the film from a road movie to only being set in Los Angeles to accommodate that. When it was released, it made a big splash and received a heaping helping of solid reviews, and is still sitting at 98% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Universal was nervous about it though, since the film was weird and subversive, and figured that there was no way to make money off of it, but after the reviews, they beefed it up a bit, and it ended up doing okay, bringing in close to $4 million. However, it's since gone on to become a massive cult hit for its satire, soundtrack, and sensibilities. Cox planned a sequel at one point and even did some filming on it, but it was never completed. At one point, there was a documentary about the attempts to make that film called A Texas Tale of Treason, but that film appears to now be lost. However, the script for the sequel was taken and adapted into comic book form back in 2008 as Waldo's Hawaiian Holiday, which deals with Waldo adjusting to life in the 90s. Waldo being the name that Otto took after the film. There was also Repo Chick in 2009, which was also directed by Cox, made for only $200,000, mostly against a green screen. Because Cox didn't solely have the rights to Repo Man, he couldn't call it a true sequel, so it's referred to as a non-sequel, and doesn't specifically mention any characters or events from this one, although several actors return in new roles.
Yeah, let's go get sushi and not pay.
And I'll give this a 4, almost a 4.5, maybe like a 4.25. And yeah, how do you not love Repo Man? Like, it may be a little disjointed and unfocused, but It's so fun and bizarre and cool and one hell of a roster of bands. Its SFCS is a 3 since it did get pretty well known and did impact the genre a bit, but it's still a very niche film that didn't reach the wider mainstream. Should you watch it? The repo code says you have to.
On my face! Hold him, Arlene! Freeze! My face!
So there you have 1984 is off to a start. Not a great start, but not a bad start either. My favorite of this block is definitely Repo Man. Great movie. Love the hell out of it. You should watch it if you haven't. Go check that out. Let me know if that's your favorite down below in the comments. Let me know if you don't like it. Let me know which of these is your favorite, which of these you've seen, haven't seen, and would now like to see right down below there. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you get and the bell to get notified of when new videos go up there. And also check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support this channel and the project. Because yeah, 1984 has begun. We're going to go right into it, keep on chugging through this year right here on the 80s Project.